grand old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again. And when they were up, they were up. And when they were down, they were down. And when they were only halfway up, they were neither up nor down. Thank you for joining me, Thomas Sheridan, here on a very special and a very sobering broadcast on New Year's Eve 2015, which I do want to make, but also has been a remarkable experience for me pertaining to what the topic tonight will be about. And that will be about how we have been gaslighted on a monumental level towards some very sinister and dangerous ends. If there was one broadcast I've ever made that I can actually say is the most important one I've done, and this is beyond the blind spot one about the Manchester potential serial killer, it's even beyond that one. This is it. Tonight, the veil is lifted because in the last 24 hours I've had a revelation given to me by someone I respect very highly, who I'd been dealing with for a while, and it will explain finally how this flat earth mass psychosis took off, who's behind it, and more importantly, if you are dabbling in it or connected anyway to it, immediately get off now, because you may be in very grave danger. You may find yourself associated with some very dark forces. Contrary to what people are saying, the Flat Earth movement is not just a bunch of quacks. Yes, it's full of people who are not very bright, not very intelligent, and very, very gullible. But this does not mean they are harmless. The Bolsheviks were considered the same way. The Inquisition were considered the same way. We are coming from a time and a history where we can look back and point out that such gaslighting and such organized mass psychosis is deliberately engineered in order to recruit patsies for other purposes. And tonight I am going to explain to you who, why, what, and when, and how I came to know this, and why I want you to know this too. Tonight, New Year's Eve, I would implore you, if you have any videos on your YouTube channel and you're a decent person and you want a future, I would ask you to immediately begin deleting them, remove yourself from any flat earth groups, and so on. You are being led down a very dangerous path. Before I begin, I would like to talk about my own relationship with this flat earth thing. Now, anyone who's paid attention to the alternative media and the alternative scene knows that this thing took off really on a big way early in 2015. It was simmering before that, but it really took off around this time, actually a year ago. Since then, it has spread like wildfire, and I would say that, to my amazement and depression and despondency, about 25% of the people, at least 25% of the people in the alternative scene, now believe the earth is a flat disk based on very powerful neuro-linguistic programming, use of binaural beats, and other methods to hypnotize them, similar to what cults use, using tropes, mantras, and means to give them a sense of purpose, that they are a modern day version of the 12 apostles who are fighting for justice, to make everyone believe the earth is flat. I cannot even comprehend that many people now think the earth is a flat disk, but they do. It shows the power of brainwashing, mass mind control, and the use of neuro-linguistic programming, and the effects it has on people who are lost, gullible, or in many cases have extremely addictive personalities. Very easy people to target and brainwash. But it goes bigger than that, because you cannot build a movement like that so quickly without serious financial and administrative resources. You just can't. The flat earthers are not joking when they say it's a revolution. That's exactly what it is. A good old-fashioned, created and engineered revolution to bring you right back to where you started from. I tried for so long to ignore the flat earth bullshit. It just drove me insane at times. Look, with guys pointing to the sea with a camera and saying things, I don't see any curve, do you, from the standing on a beach. To people pointing out that GoPro cameras having a fisheye lens is proof that the earth is flat. No, it's just proof that GoPro lenses have a fisheye lens. Our ancient ancestors knew the earth was a ball, a globe, a sphere. They knew that. It's the easiest thing in the world to detect if you are capable of going outdoors and spending time among nature. I posed a question to the flat earthers, which none of them have ever answered correctly, and the link is down below. I asked them, why does if the earth is a disk, why does my 30-year-old telescope have an equatorial mount that balances it according to the center of the planet? They could not answer it. They just could not answer it. They didn't even know what an equatorial mount was. This is what we're dealing with. The most obvious thing to notice why the earth is a globe is your inner ear. Your inner ear is actually grounded to the center of the planet. On a far more disturbing level, to see so many women fall for this flat earth cult. And that's what it is. And like I've been telling you all along, cults are engineered by the intelligence services. And we'll talk about this later, and why certain people who have a history of joining one cult after the next are in this flat earth nonsense. Women are denying their own femininity by saying the earth is flat. The earth is Gaia. It's a ball. It's a globe. It's a breast. It's a pregnant belly. It's a nipple. It's an ovum. That's the earth. The earth oozes female energy. Our ancient ancestors knew this in every culture. They never thought it was a man because they knew it was a globe. And how you have been led down this path this shows how deep the gaslighting is. I used to assume that every woman, especially a woman who was spiritual, automatically understood in her soul that she was standing on a globe planet that was based on her own female identity as a greater expression of the as above, so below. But it's not to be. There's half of the people, when I see posts arriving on Facebook where someone posts about that there's a polar tilt shift coming in, and this woman writing underneath, well, I believe in the flat earth theory, but idea, she said, not theory, but I also believe in the polar shift. When you see flat earthers saying happy solstice, for Christ's sake, you just know how deep the gaslighting goes, how deep it's gone. They don't even know why they believe the earth is flat. They've just been bombarded with enough memes, tropes, and buzzwords. And this has the hallmarks of the intelligence services. And I recruited someone, passively I might add, to get to the bottom of this. Someone who didn't even know there was a flat earth movement. But even beyond this, what I have discovered in the last 24 hours confirmed my suspicions that so much of the alternative scene is run directly by foreign intelligence agencies. That the mass of the alternative scene is one gigantic patsy network, a counterintelligence operation by foreign intelligence agencies hostile, for the most part, to the Anglo-American NATO establishment, who are creating cultures and memes and tropes within an alternative scene for very specific intelligence operations, sabotage and recruiting purposes. The latter is the one that extremely concerns me the most, because it's actively recruiting patsies for other operations. I will explain more as it goes on, as I'm trying to go through the notes I took down yesterday carefully and trying to be as mature, adult and responsible. I want to be responsible about this. I'm not Alex Jones. I don't thrive on feeding off fear. I'm just telling you that you live in a far more dangerous world than you realize. And what may be a little crusade or a religious social group or a cult that you've joined could be something far more darker and dangerous. You've got to be fucking careful with this stuff. In 2012, I spoke along with John Perkins and a few others in London at the Financial Terrorism talk. Very good event organised by Ian Crane and some other people. Very good. I got a great response there. It worked out really, really well for me. Afterwards, now this event attracted a very broad group. You did have the conspiracy-minded type folks there, but you also had mainstream folks who would have read Mr. Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So that was what was interesting about that event. Now, afterwards, I got into some conversations with a few different gentlemen. A couple of them were psychiatrists and psychologists who were saying, you've nailed totally the psychopaths. And one of the reasons it's not talked about is, he says, because many of the people who run psychiatry at the very top are psychopaths themselves. So they have a vested interest in keeping this all quiet, or gaslighting it into all kinds of other nonsense. There's another gentleman there I met. Well, actually, I met his daughter. And the daughter and the father were there. Now, the daughter briefly came over to me to say that she'd read Puzzling People and she thought the book was great, blah, blah, blah. And she wanted me to meet her dad, who took her there. Now, she was still in college. She was only in her early 20s. And the father had paid the tickets. And all this nice English gentleman comes over, says, great speech. I really enjoyed what you had to say. It's really fast. He didn't, typical thing. He didn't say, I believe it. He was right to say that, but he said, I really, like what you said. And he looked familiar to me. I didn't know who he was. And a couple of months, well, actually, it was nearly a year later, that she contacted me again after she decided to change her degree. And she was going to change her degree she was studying something like, I don't know, medieval English literature, but she said she wanted to study psychology, and she was very interested in studying the psychopathy stuff too as well. And something else had happened around that time. I think it was Dutton's book or something like that came out. And we just started talking again on Skype. And then she mentioned that she said, Dad loves your stuff. He's a real, we listen to your radio show sometimes laughing our heads off, and this always gives food for thought. And Dad really likes it. And I said, I hope in a good way. And he said, no, he really digs it. And so then she tells me who her dad is. And I had no idea. Now, this guy is quite famous. This man is very famous, actually quite famous. Well, he was. He's not well known now. He was a correspondent. He was an investigative journalist. I can't name him, of course, for obvious reasons. But if I was to type his name into Google, it lights Google up. He's written for The Economist, The New Statesman, The Guardian. He's done work for the BBC, ITN, Newsweek. He's done all kinds of. He's retired now, but he does teach about things like military and he's big into, he knows a lot about military stuff, and he's written 2 books on generals, on famous military figures. So he's like an old-fashioned English gentleman, very successful. He's in his 70s now, but he looks amazing. And I started chatting to him, and we became mates on Skype. And he read, then, after a while, he read when Walpurgis Night came out. He read it and said he loved it, and he says it's all true. But he says, you do know, Thomas, that all this occult stuff is really all secret societies and agencies. And I says, yeah, I know all that. Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it comes down to all these occult circles that all these people think about, right back to the Freemasons, are really all about intelligence. They're the earliest versions of the intelligence agencies. And so we were talking about that. Now, at the time, I was very interested in the Yugoslavian Civil War, because he was there working for some military magazine on the reorganization after Tito had died, the reorganization of the Yugoslavian National Army. And he was in Belgrade dealing with these people when, at the same time, Milosevic went down to Kosovo and made his famous speech. It was infamous speech. You'll run away no more, or something like that, to the Serbs living in Kosovo, which sparked the Yugoslavian Civil War. Now, he was telling me that he was among senior officer and military staff in the Yugoslavian National Army of all the various ethnic groups who were desperately trying to keep the country together. They were professional military men. They'd all put their ethnic and religious and racial differences aside to try and hold Yugoslavia together as a nation. And what he said he witnessed was gaslighting. He's using that term now. At the time, he said he called it swings and roundabouts or something like that. Yeah, swings and roundabouts. And he talks like this, and he goes meddling forces, but he's not a snob or anything. He's a lovely man. Then he tells me that it was forces, unseen forces as he called them, meddling swings and roundabouts in Slovenia, who made the Slovenians break away and form their independence. It had deliberately been engineered by swings and roundabouts, meddling forces, in order so the majority of the Yugoslavian National Army leadership was Serbian. Now, under the Yugoslavian constitution, which remained intact even after Tito died, if any of the states broke away, they would have to go and invade them and bring them back into the Union. What happened was Serbia would have to go and attack Slovenia, but in order to do that, would have to pass over Croatia in order to get to Slovenia. And that's what caused the Yugoslavian Civil War, because the Slovaks said, no, you're not moving tanks over. Then, the Croatians said, no, you're not moving over to go have a go at Slovenia. Then the split happened, and he said he was literally watching the Croatians and the Serbs and the other groups robbing and stealing military equipment and running back home quickly with it. The road between Belgrade and Split in Croatia, he said, it was literally filled with former Croatian troops stealing everything from tanks to bicycles to guns and a lot of fuel trucks filled with diesel and things like that, and driving them back to Croatia. And he said it happened incredibly quickly and overnight. And then he found out later why it happened quickly and overnight is because these interethnic groups had been stoked well in advance of Tito's death below, mainly through things like the Orthodox and the Catholic Church in those countries, but also through things like sports clubs. Having people say, if this country gets independent, the Serbians will kill us all. Stoking these fears and these other kinds of things. Stoking fears within Orthodox religious circles in Serbia that if Tito dies, what will happen then is the Muslims will kill us all. We'll all be taken. It'll be an Islamic republic. They'll come over from Bosnia. That's these kinds of irrational fears were built up. So Milosevic was ready to go, and the rest of them. So this man knows this stuff inside out. He was in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He's been everywhere. He was even during the Yugoslavian Civil War. He was taken as a prisoner by Croat forces, and they stuck him in the back of a military vehicle. And the two other guys that they were with, they took him outside and shot him. The only reason he got away as spies, the only reason he got away was because he had a press pass, and he saw the viciousness of the Civil War, straight up to his face. But he's like very calm about it, very direct, very approachable guy. So we were chatting away on all kinds of things and all the subjects I'm interested in. And then I just mentioned to him, do you know there's loads of people think the earth is flat? And he burst out laughing and he says, I don't believe it. And I says, no, seriously. And I sent him all the videos and the links and all that stuff. And he comes back to me, yes, this, and I gave him ages ago. He comes back to me yesterday to wish me a happy new year. And he says, so I see some of your flat earth friends have been giving you grief. This is what he said. And he says, make sure they keep doing it. And I said, why? He says, because they're being massaged. They're being massaged. So then I ask him about who's behind it. I said, it's a religious organization like a church. And he says, no. He says, I'll tell you who's behind it. Now, before we get to that, and before we get to that stuff, I want to give you examples of how seemingly innocuous things, eccentric things, can be taken over and turned into a very dangerous and radical things. An example here in Ireland would be, say, in the 1870s, a group was formed called the Gaelic League, and they had no political agenda. They were just like the Welsh or the Scottish nationalists at the time. They were mostly interested in reviving the old languages, keeping the old customs, heritage, and crafts alive. It was almost like a pro kind of Luddite movement. There was a rejection against the modern age. There was an element of that in it, but they did some wonderful work in preserving many lost Irish documents and language, and started doing things like taking records down of local dialects, artwork, and crafts even. Now, what happened was they were infiltrated by a very sinister organization called the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a Freemasonic group, and they radicalized them. And we hear the story all through history, where something starts as either normal or eccentric, and then it's radicalized. And the reason why it's radicalized is to find useful idiots. To find useful idiots. The most successful gaslighting intelligence service operation that I've seen in my lifetime is Mossad's, the Israeli secret services, infiltration of Pentecostal, Baptist, and other American Bible Belt churches, with the objective of having them all rabidly pro-Israel in order to get them all celebrating the 50th anniversary of the independence of Israel in, wait for it, April 30th, 1998, Walpurgis night. Well. What was my friend saying about how all the occult is really a kind of a front for secret service and espionage? Well, there you go. Now, Mossad infiltrated these churches in the South very successfully in South America, in places like Alabama and everywhere, Texas, and had them all believing that if they supported Israel in its war against the non-Christians in the Middle East, that it would usher in the second coming of Jesus Christ. And it worked. And we now have a terrifying situation now where the majority of Zionists in the world are actually American Christians, Presbyterians, and a large percentage of them want World War III to happen to unleash Gog Magog from the book of Revelations and cause the second coming of Jesus Christ, so they can all be raptured and brought back up into heaven, into Presbyterian heaven. That was and remains an extremely effective, brilliant, and very powerful intelligence service operation run by Mossad. It was awesome in its success. to the point where I was still living in America in 1998, and I can remember these douchebags waving Israeli flags who now couldn't even find Israel on a map, who were members of ex-junkies and so on, members of born-again church, waving a flag going, "Happy birthday, Israel! It's a miracle! God kept Israel alive so we could bring back Jesus against all..." Total, like, you could just see, it was literally, he was sitting there, and what was he doing? He was echoing the memes and the tropes and the neuro-linguistic programming that was done by a central operations to get him to say this. This is how the world is. And this also brings us to the functioning of the intelligence services and intelligence operations. Generally, they have three functions. The first is administrative. They operate as liaisons between the interior ministries and what you would call the interior ministry within some countries, or maybe the attorney generals within republics, and the military branches. So you would have the central cabinet of government during wartime. You would have the interior ministry, and then the function of the intelligence services, primarily, and even during peacetime, is to be the liaison between the war cabinet and the branches of the military, the admiralty, the navy, the air force, and the army, marines, etc. They're a cohesive force. They're like couriers. That's their primary function, administrative liaison. Secondary is data gathering in a passive manner. When I say passive manner, literally just bureaucratic record keeping. Despite what people think about James Bonds and spies and movies like The Recruit with Al Pacino and Colin Farrell, it's not like that at all. There's no great action. 99% of people who work intelligence services are just basically snooping passively on behalf of their brief, their remit. And then finally, the third aspect, and is the most, and especially in this day and age, the most powerful of all, is the passive initiatives. And this is the cultural creation. This is where actual sabotage happens in a cultural sense. In the past, agents would do things like blow up. Say they were, you have like Red Squirrel on East Berlin, and Orange Tomato in West Berlin, and what they would do would be try to sabotage each other's operations. You've heard me talk about Spectaculars, the way they did it in London with the Russian embassy moving equipment in and out, so you would have the intelligence services think that there was some kind of big machines going into the Russian embassy when nothing of the sort was happened. It was to create a diversion, a spectacular. So that kind of thing still exists, but today it's on the internet. So the Mossad thing is an example of that. The Mossad infiltration of the Pentecostal churches, the born-again churches, is an example of that. It's not like James Bond anymore. It's about creating culture. It's about cultural means and tropes being developed in order to two reasons for it. Sabotage, right? Now, this brings me, firstly, before I get to the flat earth thing. I know I'm taking a long road to this, but I said I have to explain myself very carefully and get this out in such a way that I can't just jump in and say it. So I have to put down the framework, okay? So please bear with me. For instance, right, I have absolutely no doubt, and my friend, my source in the UK, this gentleman I was talking about, confirmed that the other side, the Iranian Secret Service, SAVAK, SAVAK, are the ones who have all the truthers hating Israel. That's the ones. So all the truthers who are sharing pictures of Arabs being killed, and you see all this Arabic script on it. Press TV is a big part of this as well. They're actually being the patsies and the useful idiots and the stooges for the other side. So they have them all waving Palestinian flags and caring more about Palestine than they do about back home. But also it gets more sinister than that. They're also the ones that have you all believing that things like ISIS didn't do the Paris attacks. You see, they're the ones who immediately create the conspiracy theories that all the most gullible truthers fall for, like that girl with the phone that you're supposed to be everywhere. This kind of nuts, because they're looking for morons, and that's why you look at many of these people who do this. Half their friends have Arabic names, and this is what's happening. and they're all like they're all pro-Palestinian, and they all hate Israel, not because they have any fundamental belief in that, but they have been massaged and coached into it. If, like I've been saying from day one, if you are truly awake, you never ever take sides especially in another person's war. You stay neutral. So that's Savak, is massaging and stoking the anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic elements of the truth movement, the alternative scene. Totally 100% complete. They're the ones doing it. So they're the ones who, but when they do things like that, they're also not only looking for patsies and fools that they can use to feed this shit to, but they're also sabotaging the operations of the other side. So, for example, right, I'll give you, like, this, it goes so deep, right, you have to understand. You see, truthers are still more asleep than when they thought they were asleep. The people they call sheeple are actually more awake than them, because they've gone to a second level of being asleep. They haven't woken up. They have an inability, many of them, to understand the idea of the cloak and the dagger, the idea of the shadows in operations. Look, suppose you were in, say, Hampstead, right, in London, and there was in there an ISIS sleeper cell that the intelligence, say MI5 or MI6, was trying to get the handle on, spying on, see who they were connecting to, right? What is the best way to hide that operation looking at the sleeper cell? Is to create a hysteria in Hampstead based on something else that isn't true. You see where I'm going with that? You've created the distraction. You've created the spectacular. You've created the diversion away from what you want. So therefore, you have all the crazy truthers looking for satanic pedophiles. There are none. But it's creating a cover story for what's really going on there. And I would not be surprised if the day that they all went down the church, going around all the morons going around the church holding mobile phones and following parishioners going, satanic pedophile! I would not be surprised if the major operation by the intelligence services was unleashed underneath that. Like a mass arrest or something like that happened, and we'll never know about it. We'll never know about it. So you see how it works too? Also, it can be used to undermine things. So suppose there was an intelligence operation regarding a politician or something else that was not good for anyone, even the Americans. Sabotage would happen. I have no doubt that the Somme murders, which took place around all these US Air Force bases, those two girls were found dead literally inside an American military base. I have no doubt that the whole Somme thing was also a massive cover, a mass gaslighting operation on that level. And people run the wrong. They want as many people running in the wrong direction all the time. So talking to my friend and knowing what you know now about how these things work. We were sitting down and talking about it, and he said to me, he says, from when he was in Yugoslavia to the flat earth thing today, he said, look for the consistencies. Look for the behavioral tropes and memes. And then you have a absolute certainty of intelligence handlers behind it. So he said to me, what do you think are the ones that stand out to you in this flat earth one, apart from the fact it's ridiculous? And I said, I've noticed two things that comes out every single time, and it's almost like it is dealing with brainwashed people. One is everything comes back to NASA. It's almost like they have been psychologically framed in such a way that no matter how you talk about science, history, astronomy, cosmology, and other space agencies, they cannot unlock or decouple from their obsession with NASA. The second one is They're extremely arrogant, like cult members. They think they have discovered supreme knowledge, and you're a fool. And you're a fool if you. And he said to me, "That's it. You got it right there and then." And then he goes, and that leads us to what this is about. Let's talk about the arrogance. Now, how this would have started they would have felt the intelligence services had an objective, and I'll tell you what that objective was later on. But my suspicion, and my friend confirmed it to me, that the flat earth movement is not a product of some guy who's a yoga instructor with 2 dead eyes who wears glasses so we don't have to see how dead his eyes is. It's not anything like that. That guy is just a Lee Harvey Oswald, as is many. I don't name people by names. I have the mafia approach to these things. It's an army I'm dealing with. I don't attack families, and I don't attack people's private lives. But the other ones involved in it, it's all being run out of the Foreign Intelligence Service in Moscow. Absolutely, 100%. The Foreign Intelligence Services were the breakaway group that came from the KGB when the KGB was dissolved in 1991. And they are as active as they've ever been. They're still as active as they were back in the old days of the first chief directorate of the KGB, going back to the 50s. But they're different now. They're different. They have a different agenda, and they're playing the same game that Savak, the Persian or the Iranian Secret Service, are doing. They've identified a certain element of the truth movement who are perfect in order to undermine US interests in the same way that Mossad back in the 1980s identified and used a perfect demographic, Bible Belt Christians, in order to undermine any interference in American Israeli foreign policy in terms of funding and so on. It was to entrench the idea. And the idea was in these churches that America has a biblical destiny to protect Israel in order to bring forth the second coming of Jesus Christ. The NASA thing became self-explanatory after a while, but it just gave me confirmation on it. The Russian Secret Service are using the flat earth movement, and remember, we're talking about tens of thousands of people at this point, in order to create a cultural war to undermine the prestige of NASA. NASA has, in recent times, now a lot of this has to do with space-based technology, things like the Star Wars weapons program, and remember, NASA functions also as a kind of, shall we say, air traffic control for space operations in general. But the one behind that is the US Navy's intelligence service and spying service. So it's a very deep, highly entrenched military organization with a PR front that we know as the space exploration, and has been winning hearts and minds. The recent trip to Pluto, for example, was an enormous PR coup for NASA. We all remember the famous Simpsons episode where Homer went into space, and they made that great joke about all these machines in mission control, their only purpose is to monitor ratings. NASA is purely a public relations front for the US space-based military weapons program, which is, by all accounts, extremely advanced and far more ahead of the Soviets, or well, the Soviets are gone, the Russians or anyone else. From what I gather, it's extremely advanced, and the main body in this is the US Navy's space-based warfare element in this, and we don't know what's up there. But NASA has to be made into a bad boy at home. This was done in the 1960s with the peace and love movement. Before Laurel Canyon and the invention of all this counterculture, the Russians were stoking, the Soviet spies were stoking this in the UK with the CND group, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and the CIA quickly created the Laurel Canyon hippie scene before the KGB got into America and organized a Marxist version of it, where if the KGB had have got their way, there would have been a Marxist kind of like hippie revolution, where they would have been calling for him, which happened actually with the Black Panthers, by the way. When reality, they wanted, when the CIA got it instead, they created people like Jim Morrison and all these other types in order, and the Mamas and Papas, in order to make it a peaceful revolution. No trouble to anyone. All got to live together, boys and girls. So you can actually see the real reason the Black Panthers were despised, and then later groups like MOVE in Philadelphia were despised, was because of their direct connection to Soviet intelligence. NASA has to be undermined at home. They have to be made seem like monsters and evil. And they have found the demographic to do it. Someone in the Kremlin, well, it's not in the Kremlin anymore, but we'll just say, I forget the name of the district in Moscow where it all happens. I was reading it the other day. Oh yeah, the Yaseznov district in Moscow, which has replaced the Kremlin, where all the intelligence, it's like the defense in Paris. They identified probably things like the Apollo moon hoax landing and all this kind of thing. And they saw these kinds of people. They found a very specific demographic. If you look at the people who were taken in and spellbound by the flat earthing, there's certain things you'll notice. They're aliens. They're into aliens and things like that. They're Christianized. There's a strong Christian elements, so therefore there's already an inbuilt evangelical aspect to it. This is why mind control cults always seek out Christians, because are Jehovah's Witnesses and things like that, because they've already been brainwashed. They just have to brainwash them in a different way. So the Foreign Intelligence Service in Russia is using these flat earthers to make NASA look really bad. And that's why they have stoked and fed them with these ideas of NASA being evil. And they cannot get, this is why they're so brainwashed. And this is how you know the brainwashing. It's just like they were put down and told, under some kind of like interrogation, that there's nothing else but NASA, nothing else but NASA, nothing else but NASA. Now this was all groomed and massaged offline for a long time. And the ones who, and also they will be buying, now the flat earth videos get very high numbers. A lot of those numbers would be actually bought phony accounts from Soviet intelligence to thumb it all up. Cults do that as well. They actually buy people to thumb up the video to give it more, and give it more views, to make the cult look bigger than it is. See, it's occults, secret services, secret societies, they're all the same thing. They all ultimately have the same objective. And this creates now, for the first time in America's history, United States history, a sizable demographic of people who hate NASA. They think that never a straight answer, everything they've ever done is lie. You have flat earthers now honestly believing that every single NASA mission never happened. Every single NASA photograph from space never happened. All of them, every one of them is fake. They cannot see it any other way. And that's how they have become brainwashed. They're just like the born again Christians. If they support Israel and the Temple Mount is built, Jesus will come back. And the focus is there, and they're being groomed and massaged by foreign agents. Then you say to yourself, so what's the harm in all that? What's the harm in all that? Really, ultimately, they're going to look bad. It's not going to work. Yes, but this is where it gets really dark. The main players, you see, let's look at Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was a truther of his day. He was very easily manipulated. The time he spent in the Soviet Union, he even married a Russian wife. The whole kind of thing came back interesting. Should have never been allowed back, but he was. And then he was used by the New Orleans Mafia in collusion with some dark forces in the US government to murder Kennedy. See, Kennedy was taken out by the mafia. It was just mafia thing. It was nothing to do with any Illuminati and all this nonsense. Or he was taken down for telling the truth about the Illuminati. That's all bullshit. None of that's true. All taken out of context. When he was talking about sinister force, he was talking about the Italian mafia. Kennedy was purely a mafia rub out. Mafia are incredibly intelligent and smart guys, and they used this guy Lee Harvey Oswald as a patsy, Jack Ruby, and the rest of them. Now, these guys are the same, but you don't have to take them to Russia anymore to brainwash them. You can brainwash them over the internet because it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And this is why they're firing them up. Now, they're also trying to isolate them from the rest of us. This is where they deliberately tell them to be hostile. Or, well, they don't tell them, they encourage them. So this is where you could have fellas who talk about, love and light and we should all be one, are now calling people dunces and morons and baller shills and globe believers. They're being stoked and isolated into a cult, into a corner. This is what they did to the Bolsheviks. So they create a sense of fear and a sense of we're the only ones who know the real truth and everyone else is either a moron or a spy, a dunce. Then you have an isolated demographic. When you have that demographic isolated, and here's why I've asked you to now jump out if you're involved in that scene. Now they're going to do individual profiling. Now, those of you who think, I'm really, they're spying on, not even interested in you, they're not spying on you. The CIA has no interest in you, you're nothing. But the other side they're very interested in you. Very interested in you. And they're going to work their way through the flat earthers to find the ones who believe anything. And they will test them by gaslighting them and so on, to see how far they can push them. And these are the ones that they will actually take away, in terms of the internet, and use them for special operations. These are going to be the ones who will find themselves in the book depositories of the future when shit goes down. And it only dawns on them what happened and how they were led down that path when the cops jump on them and arrest them. It's so much darker, deeper, and more intense than you realize. So on the surface, what would seem like a joke of a farcical movement of stupid and gullible people believing the earth is flat is ultimately a foreign operations program to attack and put NASA in a position of constantly defending itself, to create doubts, but more importantly, to look for the Lee Harvey Oswalds of the future, to look for the Mark Chapmans of the future. Gaslight them, crazy make them, disappoint them, isolate them, tell them they're special, pull the rug from out from underneath them, reassure them, find them, isolate them, send handlers into their lives, prime them, arm them, and send them out. Send them out. Just like Sirhan didn't know what he was doing, I have no doubt if this doesn't stop now, we're going to have the most ardent flat earthers suddenly in the middle of a place with a gun in his hand, wondering how the hell he got there. How the hell it got from calling someone a baller shill and posting ridiculous videos of the sun and the moon inside. It looks like a roulette table, a glass sphere. And you lot out there say to me, Thomas, you've taken this whole flat earth thing too seriously. They're a bunch of morons and it's a joke. Well, they want you. When I say they, I mean the foreign intelligence services. They want you thinking they're a joke. Just like they wanted us thinking that the people in those crazy churches in the American Deep South were a joke. They're not a joke now. They're not a joke now. These people want World War III started and hurried up so Jesus can come back. And these flat earthers, a day will come when they're not a joke. Just like the Bolsheviks were considered a joke. the day came when they were not a joke. What begins in farce often ends up in horror. And you remember that. So I hope I've given you something to think about. Certainly I was quite shaken by that thing when it was confirmed to me. And you don't have to believe it. I do. I know it's true. It's easily confirmable. Just look at the people on your list who became flat earthers. Look how they behaved. Look how they changed. Look how they all used the same language. Look how they had the Borg mind and they all behaved the same. They are being handled. It's as obvious as day. Well, I hope you have a happy 2016, and I hope that you become more aware that sometimes it's deeper, darker, and slimier and sinister. I can think of no more appropriate way to close tonight's broadcast on this New Year's Eve, which started in 2015 and ended in 2016, by reading the foreword on my 2012 book, Envelop the Psyche. Ask yourself, what is popular culture? How does popular culture, along with universally accepted ideas of art and creativity, mass media, publishing, and financial constructs, political and social doctrines come into existence? Are mass social and cultural movements, coupled with one's personal and social identity perception, always a natural turbulent flow of social, economic, philosophical, spiritual, and artistic threads of the collective human experience? Movements which organically emerge from underground, eventually to become mainstream cultural and socially acceptable consensus. And then, from these options, we pick and choose objectively from the smorgasbords of taste and opinions. And that we, the consumer, the investor, the voter, including our individual decisions, affiliations, allegiances, and even our emotional attachments, are all a unique personal experience, determined exclusively by our own choices when all is said and done. The answer to all of these above questions is a resounding no. Good night.